including my own. So I'm Belinda Petrie from South Africa, One World Sustainable Investments, and I'll be your moderator for today. And I'll come back to how we framed the session and what we're trying to get out of it in a minute. But the Africa story obviously came, well, maybe it's not obvious, and I'm also very conscious of my white face, but it came from the fact that a lot of our work is in Africa. A lot of the need for nature-based solutions is in Africa. The infrastructure deficit, hard infrastructure deficit globally is probably the greatest in Africa. And not that nature-based solutions are necessarily the alternative to the hard infrastructure, but we've also seen how hard infrastructure has failed us in Africa. And we've seen these examples elsewhere in the world. So what we'll be exploring today is what are nature-based solutions, which I know Gareth will talk about. I'll introduce the speakers just now. But we really, as the session title says, wanting to demystify what I often find to be a fairly sort of grey area in terms of what is the definition for a nature-based solution, what exactly does it look like, what is it not, is it only about climate change because the original definitions or the original framing for nature-based solutions was actually around climate change. Now we're still dealing with issues, so although the framing has moved correctly, I think, to a broader perspective, we still sit with issues around finance, and if it's climate finance, how do you show the additionality of the nature-based solution? And there are major questions around how do you finance nature-based solutions. I think not so much at the sort of individual project level, and you will hear today about various projects and tangible examples that have been implemented, tested, etc., and tried around the world. But to me, the question is, how do you finance them at scale? So how do we achieve the kind of scale that we need? And how do we make sure that social equity is achieved? So I raised the social equity with a few people over the issue or aspect, with a few people over the last few days, including with some of our panelists, because I'm always interested to see how people in the North view social equity in the context of nature-based solutions. And I usually find, and I have been not surprised this time either, I usually find it's a very different perspective. And I think it's important that the different perspectives get on the table. So we're going to have a session today where the first part is presentations to set the scene and contextualize some of the issues that I've already raised now, but then we're moving into a good chunk of time, assuming my speakers keep to time, which I'm sure they will, but we've got a good chunk of time for interaction. So please do think about the comments you want to raise, the issues, questions, and if you want to raise a controversial issue, please do. I'm always conscious that at World Water Week, which I love, I absolutely love it, we generally, and I suppose it's one of the reasons I love it, we're generally speaking to ourselves, pretty much a like-minded bunch of people that pitch up every year in Stockholm, which is great, and we have a lovely time for it, and I think we're able to explore new ideas. This year's theme is innovation, but we don't always have the difficult conversations, and yet when we go home to our work, in my case in Africa, in Maria's case in Latin America, we're dealing with very real issues on the ground, and the realities that people face, and we have to translate these lovely ideas into solutions that can work. So that brings me to our key objectives for today, is to think about this, yes, in the Africa context, which is the way we framed it, but how do we make nature-based solutions work? How do we demystify it, which is partly what we're going to do today, and how do we make it the new normal? In other words, the new business as usual So in 50 years' time or 30 years' time, or maybe it's even 10 years' time, the conversation has changed. So Hilary and crew, if we can bring up the Mentimeter, we're going to start by just seeing where the needle on the gauge is around nature-based solutions. So please bring out your phones. I'm sure you've all come across Mentimeter before. It should appear on the screen. It has appeared on the screen. All right, so we're going to bring Mentimeter up again at the end. So we just want to see how things maybe have shifted today. Oh, the code is there at the top. Okay, so you've got it all. And we just now need the questions, Hills. So we've got an online person that's also helping us with this session. That's Hilary. All right, so the first question is, please tell us the extent to which you think nature-based solutions are a mystery that still needs to be solved. You've got a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is it's a big mystery. 5 is everything's abundantly clear. And I'm assuming that our online people are also voting. All right, the needle's hovering at around 3, it looks like. It's a lot of sitting on the fence nearly. And we've had, it looks like 27 people, 28 that have voted. So we're going to go to the next question, which is a one-word question. So Hills, when you're ready, in one word, tell us why you ranked nature-based solutions mystification as you did. So what was the reason that you were not sure, sitting on the fence, absolutely clear, terribly unclear, in a word? I'll give you a little bit more time for this one. Wow, I should have had whoever that was as the speaker. Super clear. Up. Okay, so we might have the difficult conversation. Panelists, I heard the word, I see the word hype here. Greenwashing. Simple. Bubble. I'm going to make a note of that one. I like the word new. It ties up with the innovation theme for this year's World Water Week. All right, so a fairly mixed audience, I would say, both online and in the room, in terms of the level of understanding, the level of clarity. Some people are absolutely on it, others are feeling a bit ignorant. Some people think this is a good thing, others feel it's greenwashing. I hope that we're going to unpack some of these issues as we go through the session. And I can see there's quite a lot of conversation going on around this, around the screen, but I'm going to ask for it to please go away now. We can finish with Mentimeter. Thanks very much. So without much further ado, I'm going to start with the speakers. We will not have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please make a note of your points. We have got this big chunk of time to do an interactive panel, and your questions, comments, and thoughts around the questions in which the way that we're framing that panel when we get there can come up at that session. So starting with our first speaker, Gareth, please do come up. I'm gently inviting you, not summoning you to the stage. So Gareth James Lloyd is from UNEP. He's the Deputy Chief Manager for the UNEP DHI Centre for Water and Climate Change. He's a professional in the sustainable development of water resource field, from global policy right to ground implementation. And Gareth's going to set the scene for us in terms of what is general policy and guidance out there saying, and what are some examples of what we're facing at a global scale? The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Belinda. Please, could you bring up presentation 1?
I'm having a... Oh, you need to do it.
Okay.
I forgot that part.
No, I think we're going to manage it from here.
We might.
It's good. I think we've got it. Yeah.
So I can never work a computer that's not a Mac. But you just put it in presentation mode.
Yeah.
It'll come. It will come, right? We had a groundwater session at 9 o'clock yesterday morning, so it was the opening sort of first test run. And in the main, it went well, the technology. So, yeah, a couple of hiccups. But that's why I'm saying with certainty it'll come.
Maybe I could make a soft start by introducing myself. I'm from the north. I work globally, and some of the examples I have are from Africa. But I think, like Belinda was saying in the introduction, I mean, we really welcome an open discussion, because I think many of these issues are true in whatever geography you sit in. So this presentation I have today, it's titled Demystifying and Mainstreaming Nature-Based Solutions. I'm doing it from a UNEP perspective. This is based on our experiences from the work that we undertake. The presentation has been produced by Liz Bernhardt of UNEP and myself. Unfortunately, Liz can't be here today, but she gave me the job of talking to you. So hopefully I'll do it justice. I think as Belinda said, part of the challenge in demystifying nature-based solutions is, of course, a definition. And, let me see, slide advance. Oh, there we go. There we go. In, I think it was March 2022, the countries of the world came together and agreed on a definition for nature-based solutions. And this is quite important, not because, of course, if we all agree on a definition, we have a common understanding of what we're talking about, but also it enables us to begin to manage, measure, quantify what we're doing. It provides a first step. Now, I'm sure I've lost the attention of at least 50% of the room as you're all reading this definition. That's totally fine and understandable. I'm not going to read it to you, so that's why I'm happy. But I would like to highlight 4 key points in this definition. Firstly, it picks up on the actions, as you can see, to protect, conserve, sustainably manage, etc. Next, it picks up on the type of ecosystems it's concerned with. So modified, terrestrial, freshwater, coast marine, etc. Next, on the challenges, and these are development challenges, no surprise there, social, economic, and environmental. But then quite interestingly, who or what benefits? And here we see very much it's people, it's humans. So this is a very human-centric approach, and I think that's quite interesting. And perhaps we'll come back to that in the discussion. From a water point of view, we regard nature-based solutions as being highly valued for managing water risks, such as floods and droughts, for managing water availability, water supply, retention, and also, of course, water quality. And we'll have a look at some of those examples. While we're in this phase of coming up with definitions, I wanted to give a quick mention to ecosystem-based adaptation. And those of you who like to read the slides, please go ahead and read that definition of EBA. But the relationship is EBA is basically the application of a nature-based solutions approach for climate resilience and adaptation. And a little bit later, we'll be talking about financing, and I think particularly while nature-based solutions have been around for hundreds, thousands of years, of course, there's been a very strong interest in recent years linked to climate issues and climate financing, so it's important to pick up on that relationship. So I have some examples here of NbS in action. I did think I could give you some kind of theoretical diagram of multiple benefits, but I thought maybe it's better to get into these concrete examples. And something to mention is, of course, that nature-based solutions typically have multiple benefits. The examples here: mountain forests, source water and livelihoods protection. One of my favorite examples here is from the Uluguru Mountains in Tanzania, where locals are paid to protect a mountain forest, which is an important water resource, and in terms, as a payback also, they are able to harvest the benefits from the forest, whether it's poles for building, honey, etc. In terms of coastal storm protection, for mitigation, biodiversity and livelihoods, a great example there, mangrove forests around a lot of areas of southern sub-Saharan Africa, with the exception, of course, of the southwest. But there are many rehabilitation schemes. A good example is from Beira in Mozambique, where they're mixing both this, as it's sometimes called, green infrastructure or nature-based solutions with hard infrastructure in a combined approach, which I hope we'll be talking a little bit about later as well. In terms of the traditional knowledge and the rainwater harvesting is super important in those particularly parts of Africa which are arid and maybe more remote, and where piped solutions just simply aren't an option. Wetlands for water purification, climate resilience, biodiversity and livelihoods. Many examples there. A favorite of mine was, I think it was called Wings Over Wetlands from West Africa, Nigeria and Niger, but also spread to many countries where actually it was the primary focus from a wildlife side was bird life, but there was also an ecotourism element for local people. If I was to combine those last two pictures in the center and bottom left, bottom right, sorry, I would say a good example of that is the recent Nairobi Rivers Commission and the work that they've been initiated to do. The aim of the commission is to restore the rivers in and around Nairobi to their former glory. And part of this work has been inspired by UNEP and Rotary International's Adopt a River initiative. So, just on the topic of UNEP, please allow me to make a small commercial break here and talk a little bit about what UNEP does in this area. So UNEP supports the implementation of NbS from policy to practice. A good example on the policy and practice side actually is the IWM, SDG 6 IWM support program, which facilitates countries in making action plans to address water issues, and NbS solutions are a part of that initiative. If you'd like to learn more about that, then please turn up to the UNEP booth at 3:30 tomorrow, where we'll be having a little bit more of an introduction and some question and answers, also looking for new partners to join the initiative. Another example is the Freshwater Ecosystems Explorer platform, which is used for monitoring SDG indicator 661. And the basic utility of this platform is for tracking changes and challenges in freshwater ecosystems. A more on-the-ground example of UNEP's work is the decision support systems they've recently made for Somalia, where these systems are used in planning the location of nature-based solutions. So where is the optimal area? In this case, it was where to put sand dams, but you could use it as a way of where to put wetlands or wherever there's a movement of water. And finally, on perhaps a little bit broader, is the 2 minutes. Okay, I'll speed up. Thanks. Are these UNEP knowledge products, which include brochures and courses as well. One of my favorites is actually just up there, the Green Infrastructure Guide, which we made with IUCN and UNEP, of course, and that actually looks at solutions that combine green and grey infrastructure, or hard concrete infrastructure, so not as any kind of either or. Speeding up a little bit. So barriers to mainstreaming NbS. This is my last slide. So this list is not exhaustive. I'm hoping many of you have additional ones or comments to make on these barriers. Maybe you don't even agree with them, and that's good, because that will make it a more fun conversation. But of course, identifying barriers are the first step to identifying the solutions. First up, awareness. While general awareness is improving, I would say we still need to do a lot more in this area. If you ask someone outside the water world or who works on environmental issues, they will struggle to, they probably never even heard of NbS. And even people within our world, if you ask them, please can you define NbS, what is it? They will either struggle to give you a definition or a poor one. And understanding what it is super important, of course, for getting public buy-in to this and getting that political support that's so important. Lack of supportive policy and legal frameworks. Often we see that NbS is absent or superficially mentioned in these frameworks. And the problem there is that when there's a lack of clarity, you either have no action or bad action. Siloed institutions and interests. Those of you who work with IWM will be very familiar with this. So as a holistic approach, then, planning and implementation across sectors is tremendously difficult. Lack of specific how-to literature. So there's a wealth of literature telling us all why we should be interested in NbS and why it's so great. But there's very little practical literature. Here I have an example of, there's very few publications targeting engineers. Engineers need design standards to work to. They need monitoring guidelines. They need cost-benefit analysis methodologies. It's very hard to find these things. Risk aversion. So where you don't have information, or there's a lack of information, of course there's a bias towards heavily engineered or hard infrastructure solutions which are proven, and they have their benefits. I'm sure many of you know. And of course this risk aversion is particularly true at scale, where there is a problem with NbS, because where calculations might get a bit wobbly, who wants to risk their job or career by going that way? Why not stick with hard infrastructure solutions? So short-term versus long-term. NbS can take time. I think a good example is waiting for a tree to grow. Politicians are often accused of being of short-termism, but people as well in need. They need solutions today. They don't want to wait. Why should they if they don't have to? Land property ownership complexities. I think Joachim has a good example of this, which he might give us from Lake Naivasha in Kenya. But establishing who buys what, who owns what, who's going to profit, where are the returns on investment, who's going to maintain whatever is agreed, and what rights are at stake between people. These are key issues, and this can get very, very complicated. Last one. Financing, priorities, and access. Of course, authorities have many competing demands on their finances. Sometimes NbS solutions are perceived to be innovative, and there's less of a willingness to invest in innovative kind of solutions. You want hard, fast, tried, and trusted. And of course, then you come to funding or funding access. Many of us who've worked with funding mechanisms will have had direct experience that it's very, very hard to qualify for substantive funding. The processes are demanding, the pre-studies, pre-feasibilities you need to do are very engrossing. One thing I would say just before I press one more time is that one thing I'd like you to note is that many of these barriers are interrelated, of course. Something important to have in mind. So in summary, I would say we're in a process with NbS. Time is against us, but we're definitely moving in the right direction.
Great, thank
you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, a great scene setter, and be good to chat a little bit later about the barriers. And Maria, we'll look forward to your great financing solutions for all of this. Number 7, I think it was, on the list. But Christine, I'm coming to you. So Christine Colvin is up next. Christine is head of freshwater policy at WWF and has been there, I think, for about 8 years. But I always have known Christine's name from amazing work that she's done, that we still work with, on launching the Strategic Water Source Areas initiative, which, for me, is a nature-based solution that if we ever invested all our money, for me it would be in that. But I'll leave you to tell us what you want to tell us. And I suppose
Thanks,
I better help
Linda.
you
Okay, yes.
find
please.
your presentation. It's easy. Where's the mouse? Sorry, I need help, please. Can you see the mouse?
Disappeared.
And I'll just put it in presentation mode.
No, this isn't the one.
Oh, this is not
We're
the
going to
one?
get out of this one. So we need number 2.
Is that one right? No worries. Let me just put it on the screen. Can you open number 2, please?
We had I sit on the science program committee for World Water Week with Siwi, and we were laughing on Saturday in our meeting because we realized that you have to physically go to the speaker ready room to load your presentations into the cloud. So you can't email them. You have to take them on a memory stick. That cracked us up completely. It's not coming. There we go. Thank you.
I'm just gonna make it full screen.
It's on the screen.
I just want to make it full screen.
Oh, okay. Great. Thanks so much.
Can I use
If
this?
there is anything else.
Will this work? Where are the arrows? Okay.
But you can look down there.
I'll hope this works. Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. And yeah, hopefully to add another layer, you've set the scene really nicely. And I'll talk about some of the kind of global stars that are aligning for nature-based solutions, and nature-based solutions for the water sector in particular. And then try and give you a bit of a flavor of a particular set of solutions that we've been working with WWF South Africa and Environmental Rural Solutions in South Africa. Oh, it works. Great. So many of us who already work in nature-based solutions are very sort of sensitized to the position of freshwater ecosystems and that interface between nature and engineered infrastructure for the water sector. But for those of us who don't, it's sometimes quite a shocking statistic to realize the loss of nature that we've experienced in freshwater ecosystems in particular. And this graphic that's based on data that comes out of WWF's Living Planet report shows how freshwater ecosystems have literally been decimated in the last half century. So for me, this sort of spells the invitation that nature-based solutions, any way that we can work into the water sector and help nature recover at the same time, surely has to be a no-brainer. And I think one of the kind of messages from this as well is that actually the canary in the cage of our triple crises of nature loss, climate, and biodiversity loss is actually a fish, and it's a freshwater fish at that. So Another big sensitization that we're experiencing at the moment, and literally as we speak, with wildfires on the one hand and flooding from Hurricane Hillary on the other hand, is that we are experiencing the impacts of the climate crisis through water first and foremost. And we're experiencing them obviously much worse because of that loss of nature and loss of resilience of those ecosystems. So we're very much working towards this mantra of water is to adaptation as carbon is to mitigation. The issue is that a liter of water on this beautiful blue planet is very different to a kilogram of carbon. It matters where it is, and so localized solutions are really, really important. We can't just scale up the metrics in the same way that we can do with carbon. And of course, we've seen quite a path forged in terms of mitigation and carbon sequestration in nature-based solutions. But the prioritization now of nature-based solutions for adaptation and those that address water issues and link to freshwater ecosystems are becoming more prominent. And I found this quite interesting that it's becoming much more visible at a programmatic level. And these are the priorities for adaptation amongst these big global programs. And you'll see water access, flooding, urban flooding, extreme weather events, etc., are all at the top of that list. The kind of solutions that we need to implement in the water sector, working with nature, are becoming a real priority. Something that's also important for our sector to remember is that there were many steps forward actually last year in 2022, and right at the end of the year, when we had the Convention for Biological Diversity, a new global framework, the new Global Biodiversity Framework came out, and for the first time it mentioned inland waters specifically in terms of protection, conservation, and really importantly, given that 83% loss of freshwater wildlife, restoration as well. That's target 2. And this is important because when we plan for terrestrial conservation and protection, and when we plan for marine and coastal conservation, the rivers are running through it, but we kind of assume that they will benefit as well. They don't. We have to specifically plan for water, river, and wetland restoration because of their connectivity to sources of pollution and water allocation, etc., that don't affect protected areas in the same way. So this prioritization of inland waters is really, really important and gives us in the water sector an opportunity to scale up nature-based solutions along this agenda, as well as the climate agenda, as well as water security and resilience. So Belinda referred to our water source areas in South Africa. And on this map, the water source areas are the areas that you can see in colour. And these are essentially our headwater areas, the high mountainous areas that experience the highest rainfall and therefore have the highest runoff. You know, for anyone who's ever learnt the water cycle in, geography, when you're this high, it seems really obvious. But when you tell politicians that only 10% of your land area generates 50% of your surface water runoff, it's an aha moment for them. And so when we start framing it, South Africa's a water-scarce country. We have very seasonal rainfall. We're getting increasing droughts and floods, like many countries in the world. If we want to invest in nature-based solutions, if we invest here, this is where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. But as mountainous areas, they're pretty much in the middle of nowhere, so what are you going to do? Well, they do face real threats, and actually there's a huge rural population that live and work there and are part of the underserviced communities of South Africa as well. So some of the key threats there are around alien invasive plants, thirsty, mainly Australian plants that suck the life out of our headwater catchments and dry up rivers and make them drier for longer. Land degradation essentially linked to livestock management. This is where people keep a lot of cattle, sheep, and goats. So there's land degradation, erosion, loss of topsoil. And I'll talk about an example where that was very vivid. Wildfires, increasingly wildfires. And in fact, fire scars also represent a huge opportunity for nature-based solutions, accepting that we're getting these wildfires more frequently, but then looking at how do we regenerate the scars in a better way, especially where they've cleared alien vegetation. And acid mine drainage, we have coal deposits in these high areas as well. So there's still a lot that can be done in terms of the actions addressing these social and economic problems. So, sorry, I meant to show you where I'm now going to take you. The yellow area is the Eastern Cape Drakensberg water source area, and that's the case study that I'm going to give you, unfortunately, a very superficial flavor of. So this is a town, the main town in that area is Matatiele. And you can see in this larger picture here that lots of huts scattered around the landscape. People live everywhere, really hard for centralized water provision. We worked really closely with a local NGO called Environmental Rural Solutions, who are based here. A great group of people, very energetic, and they acted as the landscape convener here. That middle picture shows what when alien invasive vegetation takes hold, that's what it looks like. You can barely walk anywhere, let alone have grass for cattle, and they dry up the catchments. Cattle also a problem with soil erosion. So we worked with many solutions in this landscape. We tried to form these community public-private partnerships. There's already a massive investment from public works into clearing alien vegetation, but we wanted to get more value derived out of the wood that comes out of that. And so supported small enterprises to start developing charcoal and getting these to markets where we could have some value add. We also supported people to improve the rangeland management, reduce the risk of erosion, make sure that biodiversity was recovering in areas where fewer cattle were now grazing. And the return was that they didn't have to suffer less income, but that they were guaranteed a higher rand price per kilogram for their meat because there would be a certification, Meat Naturally, that said that they were managing their rangeland really well. And of course, we talked about implementing nature-based solutions and effects only being felt downstream. So making sure that we could build springs for the people in these areas who still lack their own water supply was a really important part of making sure that their needs were being met as well as jobs created. So very quickly, to summarize and finish off, I want to say that some of the seeds for change, as that's the theme of this conference, in this area were to work with what's working locally. Community-based solutions and nature-based solutions absolutely go hand in hand so often. These two ladies pictured here, Nikki McLeod and Sisi Matela, were absolutely central, the catalysts for so much of what happened in these landscapes. But they also worked with the rural youth. And in this area, there's 80% youth unemployment. So making sure that they had jobs and income was critical. The scales of support had to go from national, local, but also linking back to global. And this is complicated. There's no silver bullet, but if we can weave together the strands of a silver basket that help to bring these areas out of degradation and back to optional functioning, then it's complex, but it can work. And just to prove that it takes a global village to help secure our water source areas, these are all of the different actors who are involved there, which includes government, NGOs, national corporates and global corporates as well. So thanks and kudos to them and Environmental Rural Solutions as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christine. Christine's managed to address one of my key questions for the panel discussion just now, which is how do we get scale out of these best practice examples? And also how do we get scale when we are trying to address, I think, the 7 challenges that Gareth presented to us. So Christine, thanks very much. And I'm so glad, well, I knew that you were including the strategic water source areas. As I said, I know where my money's going. So talking about money, Maria, please will you come up? Our third speaker and last speaker before we go to the panel is an interactive discussion, is Maria Eduardo Ngabe-Berto. I'm sorry if I've completely messed that up. I did ask Sergio for some lessons. But Maria is from the Inter-American Development Bank, so from one of the development finance institutions. Her focus is Latin America, so she'll be, and Caribbean, sorry, I always forget that part, Latin America and Caribbean, fondly known as LAC in the climate negotiations, I know it well. So that's where that focus is coming from. Maria's a great person to have with us today. She's a water and sanitation expert. She's also a climate finance expert, has experience in public-private partnerships and in project finance, including infrastructure. So I saw that and was interested in whether you're jumping ship or you're integrating nature-based solutions, but very interested to hear your perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much
Maria.
for your kind introduction. So today I would like to present what IDB and its partners have been implementing in the last 12 years in terms of nature-based solutions. It's not this one.
You were at the right one.
Okay.
The mouse is not working.
Yeah, it's there.
Yes, this one.
Okay.
I think the challenge is they can't get rid of this thing on the screen. Don't worry
There
about
we
it.
go.
We can
Important slide. So in this slide, you'll see who are the founding partners of this partnership. So we have the Nature Conservancy, we have the Fundación FENSA, the IDB and the GAF. So we have the private sector involved, we have NGO, we have multilateral, and we have climate funds for this mission to increase the water security in Latin American and the Caribbean cities throughout the nature-based solutions. So these are the results since 2011. So there have been 26 water funds created in 8 countries of Latin America. So Mexico in 2 cities, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Ecuador, 4 cities, Peru, 2 cities, Dominican Republic, and 2 cities, Colombia, 6 cities, and Brazil, 5 cities. All of you can see different sizes, different countries. And 125,000 families were benefited and participated in these projects. The area covered amounts to 500,000 hectares of nature infrastructure, over 350 public and private partners involved, and 31 million pooled resources so far. So although we have a lot to celebrate, we have the pressure of the climate change, the water use, pollution, that makes our role vital in continuing pursuing this mission. So we're planning, there were 2 rounds, and we are going for the second round of projects of nature-based solutions. Well, this is how the Water Fund work. What's its structure? So basically, where does the funding come from? The water users, right? Tariffs, taxes, bilateral agencies, multilateral agencies, other local entities. The board of directors are the representatives of all those parties contributing. And they select the technical secretary who's gonna run the fund, right? It's the operational arm of the water fund. The bank works with seeds of capital to map the stakeholders and also legally settle the water, formally settle the water fund. And under the technical secretariat, we have the operating activities, conservation activities, and an endowment fund for the conservation and the operation with its returns. For the technical secretary, we locally hire the manager for the day-to-day operations. And this is a 5-stage cycle. We have settled throughout the years a standard methodology to do the project management. There are 5 stages. The first one, the feasibility, when we define the problem, get the partner's commitment, and hire the manager, of the director of this water fund. And then there's the design, where the strategic plan is developed with all the solutions and proper governance. We formalize the launch and the waterfront publicly, and as a third stage. And the fourth stage is the main stage is the operation, right? Development and implementation of the work plans. Finally, in the 5th stage is the maturity, ensuring that the long-term sustainability of the fund, ensure the impacts expected. This partnership has a governance structure to support and provide different tools and assistance to these water funds in each phase. So what do we see in terms of financial opportunities? How do we scale up? This is one of the questions, but we are focusing on Nexo, hydro energy, looking for blue energy and agro, the water markets. We are searching for cross-border integration and multi-sector opportunities, and some pilotage of some innovative financial instruments. If you're working with a potential large operator, we could think of green bonds, resilience bonds, performance-based contracts, and products for the nature-based solutions, such as the return on investment studies, cost and benefits analysis. We believe that the engagement of the community is very important since the early stages, and this is crucial for the success of those projects and funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Maria, and thanks for bringing up the performance-based finance instruments. So it does automatically make me want to ask a follow-up question, which you can't answer now, but please think about it for the panel discussion, is how do you measure the performance aspect in a performance-based finance instrument? May I invite the speakers to come and now be panelists? Joachim, please come and join us. You will. We have an additional panelist. Otherwise, it's the 3 speakers, which also gives you the opportunity to interact with what you've heard. Before I introduce Joachim, I've introduced the others. I just want to please join me. I'll join you. Yeah. I just want to let you know what's on my mind in terms of framing the panel discussion. And when I was thinking about this session, I mean, thinking about it for ages, because we've been planning it for ages, but just thinking about it on the way to Stockholm, the things that struck me most are the question that I've raised already. So scale, how do we achieve scale? Otherwise, this won't become business as usual, right? If we don't have scale. So how do we achieve scale? The other question that I want for us to think about is this question of social equity. The phrase nature-based solutions is nature-based solutions. I always get surprised, given where I come from, and my long experience of dealing with politicians that go, why are you talking about biodiversity? That's something for rich people to deal with. I mean, this was some years ago, but this is the kind of conversation that happens in our world. I'm sure you'll have something to say about this, Garth. In the end, it's about people. Christine, you made an interesting point. You talked about the strategic water source areas being in mountainous areas, but you did bring it back to their rural populations, the pollution issues, etc., from acid mine drainage. So in the end, you know, the downstream benefits need to have a social equity aspect to them. And I think this is important, but I'm also throwing it out there as something to deliberate. So that's just the framing for the panel. I want to welcome Joachim Harlan. Joachim is he also works with Gareth. He's the chief of the freshwater ecosystems at UNEP. He's also involved in Gareth Centre, so he's got two, probably more hats on, but more than 30 years of experience in the space, so it's very nice to have that with us. I happen to know that you're a fish man, yes. So, you know, there might be a little bit of that coming into your into your remarks, but that's great. But Joachim, what I was really interested in from you, as in some opening remarks, just to bring you up to speed with the others, maybe a bit shorter, is I suppose a couple of things. You know, what is not a nature-based solution? This is also still too demystifying. We've seen some great examples of what it is, but really interested to know, is it really so difficult to make this work in terms of making it mainstream? We've heard some of the challenges, but what with your UNEP and your fishman hat on, you know, we know it's important, but can we make this work? Are my main points for you.
Okay. So what is not a nature-based solution, I would say, is built grey infrastructure. So a sewage treatment plant in a traditional sense would not be a nature-based solution, even if what's happening inside that sewage treatment plant might be a little bit mimicking nature. You mentioned about me being a fisherman. So I am a fly fisherman and I tie my own flies. And when I tie my own flies, I try to mimic what the fish are eating. In that sense, there's something similar to nature-based solutions, right? Because we're trying to mimic nature or to manage natural or modified ecosystems and to provide services for human well-being. This is what we just heard from Gareth in the definition. And I think that's quite important. So, a few points. I know we're going to talk a lot, but you talked about scale and you talked about social equity. Now, when you talk about scale, let's think about this a little bit. Do we mean that a certain nature-based solution has a small scale, maybe benefiting a local community, and we are scaling up those solutions to take those to scale? That's one way of thinking of scale. Another way of thinking of scale with nature-based solution would be, for example, if we are looking at the problem of droughts or floods, where we might need to create artificial recharge to a huge groundwater aquifer, or allocate substantial, areas of land for flood retention purposes. That's another type of scale we're talking about, right? When we talk about social inclusion, I think it's very important to put humans right in the middle of this. And I don't want to talk too long now because we're going to come back and be a bit more interactive, but I think that we have to also recognize that in these two examples that I gave on scale, if we're talking about small local solutions, then obviously we're engaging people. They see the benefits and it benefits their livelihoods, and it might also prevent some losses and help them to be more, less vulnerable. But sometimes, we have solutions, nature-based solutions, where the benefits of the nature-based solutions are more, you could call it global in nature. We just heard, we were talking about biodiversity gains. If we look at creating maybe spaces for migratory species or creating some nature-based solutions that provide filtration of water and benefits which are widely felt much further away from the people that are at the actual place where the nature-based solution is implemented, then we have a little bit more difficult case here, you know, to get the buy-in socially from those that live right there. I'll stop there, we'll talk more.
Great, thank you. All right, thanks very much. So I'm going to give the panel a chance to answer that same question. Which same question you probably want to know? Exactly. Is this so difficult to take to scale? Is my first question for the panel. And Christine, I'm going to start with you, because as Joachim was talking, I was thinking about the strategic water source areas, which is an opportunity for scale, but we're not getting there yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but obviously one of the really important enabling mechanisms is to have the right policies in place and then to have effective regulation of those policies. So to make sure that, you know, we've identified, we've gone through a very long and very credible scientific process to identify where the water source areas are. Those are now written into national policy, and that then comes with some restrictions on land use. For instance, a contentious one being, you know, no new coal mines in those areas. That was a key one. And that's also linked to a failure of another part of government, which is around managing mine decommissioning and the long-term impacts of acid mine drainage. Making sure, obviously, that not every nature-based solutions needs to be written into national policy, but in the case of the water source areas, it was one that could and was very appropriate for that. There were some national scale solutions that are required, like a different management of mining, agriculture and forestry, and alien invasive plants. But then there are other layers of local solutions which are really important. And I think that's where your question around equity and inclusivity comes in. Because, you know, if we were only listening to the national water planners and the engineers, and we're going in with the intention of stopping soil erosion, there was a dam built downstream of this area that silted up within 4 years because of soil erosion, because of mismanagement of land in that area, or the pressures on the land in that area. So, but water engineers can't just walk in there and dictate the odds. So I think one of the really important elements of success for this was the fact of having the landscape conveners there, who then identify what are the important local solutions, like spring protection, like access to markets, reducing the pressure of overgrazing areas, because now you're getting a better price for fewer cattle. So be open to local solutions being layered into potentially a bigger nationally relevant nature-based solution as well. And having those, I mean, we talk about stackable benefits from water-focused nature-based solutions, but there are often stackable solutions that we have to try and fit together. It's a real Lego tower. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll be as good at building the Lego as we were when we were little kids, right?
Yeah. Be
'Cause
creative.
It's remarkable to watch that.
Yeah.
So it's going to bring me to you, Maria. You know, this point of stackable benefits, I think is an important one, and it ties up with what I was raising just now. You know, how do you make the performance finance instruments? How do you measure that performance, and reach some scale? I think the other part of my question for you around this is what Christine's raised is, my words, not yours, but multiple sectors and different parts of government not coming together in our instance. And I won't go into the state of the nation, but this is a common challenge, right? And maybe an eighth one on your list, Gareth, you know, the multi-sectoral approach. So I was also wondering how you measure for performance against stackable benefits that are, I can move around, that are also then linked to those performance-based instruments.
Okay. No, first of all, I would like to clarify. When I spoke about performance-based contracts, I was referring to the projects with utilities.
Okay.
But which is not the case.
Yep.
Because performance indicators requires tracking them, requiring some governance, required some you have to have a structure behind that. So I think utilities can manage. So, for example, water losses, collection efficiency rates. These are the projects that with the utilities I was referring to. So I think we have to move somehow forward to reach on those small scale projects. But if I may speak a little bit about the scalability. So I think we have a long way to go in this sense too. What we have done designing the structure for financing, I think it has been successful because you saw the number of cities in the region, but it's still very small. Close to what we have to do, because in Brazil we have 5 cities, but we have 5,000 cities. So, and you can think about. So we need to. I think I agree with everything that has been said, but we need standardization of guidelines and protocols, and the awareness, the engagement of local and national authorities to consider nature-based solutions in their policies, in their public policies. So if I can add this to the discussion, it would be great too. Also, data. So you need data on these projects, I think, to help to scale up.
Okay. All right, policy and data. And you're the first, I think, that's mentioned the data, but the policy theme has come all the way through. Gareth, with what you've heard, does it make life more difficult or less difficult in terms of getting nature-based solutions landed? You had a lot of challenges.
I think the challenges all remain. I mean, there were good explanations, but the challenges all remain. Just to come back to the scale, I think solutions I mean, it's a cliche, but it's true, as cliches often are. Solutions need to be context-specific. Do we always want to scale? I know there's always that ambition, we need to, but could it be that very local solutions to problems can be scaled broadly? Does it have to be mega projects, which are, of course, quite interesting? You can have huge budgets, but as we know, in some countries, that just increases the complications tenfold.
It's such an excellent point. Do we always want to scale? And I think this issue of you can't always replicate because it's not a one-size-fits-all has been pretty much a theme that's come throughout here. But let's hear what our audience has to say. There are some microphones roaming around, or there will be. So I see a hand. The first one I saw is in the middle, in the 1, 2, 3, 4th row. Can you see it? That one? And then I've got a couple of hands down here. There's about 25 hands at the moment. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move around the room. So I'll take 2 from down here, and then I'm going to take 2 in the middle and 1 on that side. And if there isn't 1 on that side, I'll come back, and that'll be 5. And then we'll pause. Yeah, I've got to go. I've also got to go online. I'm being reminded, but I'm very aware of that. Thanks. All right.
Yes, thank you very much to all the presenters. It's a question for Maria, for the last presenter, regarding the maturity of the fund. Question, how do you manage to sustain the fund? And was that a prerequisite in the feasibility study at the first step? Thank you.
Can I answer?
No, can you hold it? Yes. So I'll take 5 questions. I'm sure you'll cope. I'll help you. So maturity of the funds is the first. There were 2 down here. Garth, right in front.
So Garth from South Africa, representing National Business Initiative. Just want to speak to a couple of issues. The first is with regards to Gareth's list of barriers. I mean, I think that one cannot discount the context, the economic context within which this all takes place. So, which then can lead to a bureaucratic barrier. I come from national government working in that country, and I've come to understand that the economics around that country drove a lot of bureaucracy around unlocking finance for nature-based solutions. So I think that that has to be taken into consideration as a barrier. The second point I want to make is this idea of scale, and I think you raise a good point around mega scale. I mean, for us, we were looking at scale more horizontally. Where could we advocate in other parts of the country for similar processes to take place, and not necessarily grow something locally into a mega project? That leads me to my third point then around advocacy for engineered solutions, and a request for you just to expand on your Bira example, because again, in our country, this engineered solution is very prevalent, and the nature-based solution narrative is emergent. And how do we bring these two together in a very real, almost a business case, if you will, example of what a nature-based solution can bring to the party? And I'd love to hear a little bit more about Bira to help illustrate the point, I hope, in us taking the nature-based solution argument forward in light of a strong and heavily engineered solution. Thank you.
Thanks. I assume you've got that mouthful. Thanks, Garth. All right, I said I would take two up at the back. Can you raise your hands again? We'll come to you. I'm just trying to manage the logistics of getting this mic around the room.
I got the mic.
You got the mic. All right, speak.
I'll pass it over.
No, it's fine.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Super interesting presentation. I'm also an old fish man. I'll try not to make this too long-winded of a question. So first, I'm super pro NbS. I mean, like if you think of a classic thing like mangroves, I mean, there's virtually no downsides, right? I mean, it's increased biodiversity, terrestrial and aquatic, fishery, nursery habitats. It prevents soil erosion. It's a carbon sink, and it provides sanitation services for free. And back in my day, when I worked on this, and I'm talking like 20 years ago, I think the big sort of barrier that was the talk of the town then was like, well, how do you quantify that service into a financial value? So it was like payment for ecosystem services. I'm not even sure we use those terms anymore, but that was like the big thing back then. So I was hoping you'd give me some hope that now, 20 years later, that with all the examples of projects being run, that baseline is more or less established, that you can say like plant 1 hectare of mangroves will lead to this. This is the benefits, this is preventative measures, this is the financial benefit, the human benefit, etc. And that's like a tool that's sort of more widely accepted now by decision makers, and not sitting in some sort of peer-reviewed dusty journal, but like genuinely used. So that's my main question.
Great, thanks very much. I'm going to go online while this mic is moving around. Hilary, we've got an online One World team member who'll give us the chat. So Hilary, I'm looking for you, but you're of course in Cape Town. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Diana. I work for TNC, and I have a question and a small commercial. But my first question is, have DFIs thought, like, if we're thinking on mainstreaming, like including in loans that you provide in water and sanitation, a percentage to nature-based solutions, like to be included in this grant? So that's my question. And also the commercial. In TNC, we have a facility called Nature for Water Facility that helps local organizations develop watershed investment programs. So if there are any small organizations wanting to implement or develop a water fund, we are here to help. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, can we stop with the mic, please? Can we stop with the mic? I need to go online. Just for a minute. Hilary, can you just tell us a little bit about what's happening in the chat room, please?
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
I am your disembodied voice for the day, all the way here in Cape Town. So we do have a very lively chat here going on. We've got a comment and a question from Wesley Pereira, which I'll read quickly, and then a question/comment from someone else. So I'll go through it very quickly. So Wesley Pereira says, has a comment here saying that nature-based solutions are site-specific. Therefore, NbS has the potential to build back better solutions at the site to prevent future disasters. And then a question to any speaker. They note, what needs to be done to include the guidelines of nature-based solutions in the engineering standards/codes to be adopted for the development projects? Okay, and then the another question/comment here from Ketumeti Subani is, before incentives from project funds, community members used to take care of natural resources before they understood and still their importance for community livelihoods. I would therefore like to understand what incentives are offered to community members and whether they are sustainable beyond projects. What sustainability mechanisms are put in place? Some of the solutions look very much like indigenous knowledge. So what is the difference really? Maybe we should put more effort into mainstreaming indigenous knowledge in projects and really not always to find the new best thing. And one quick last question from Bojana is, I think it was something said recently. He just says, or they just say, artificial recharge is not really NbS, is it? Thank you. I think that's all we'll have time for here.
All right, thanks, Hilary. I like the last question too. All right, that's a lot. So if you don't mind, I'm going to be kind to the panelists and give them a chance to respond. I think that what I'm going to do is start with you. Maria, maturity of funds. There was also a question about loans and debt, etc.
Yeah.
Please
Okay.
go ahead.
I think, the maturity, or I think this question was, if I'm not wrong, about the financial sustainability, right, of those mechanisms. So as I said, we have this endowment which is established in the beginning of the settlement of the fund, which could finance the operation conservation. But we have to improve on the mechanisms of sustainability. And this could go by building a mechanism with involving a trustee bank, for example, to secure that the flows that come from those sources that was mentioned in the slide, right? Well, could be tariffs, taxes, or funding by the banks, the multilateral organizations could, to assure that those funds go to this specific fund. So this is something, that we could move forward to being even more sophisticated to ensure the sustainability. We could work on that.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. I'm going to go...
There's another question from me, I think the fourth,
by
TNC. That's a very, very super interesting question, I think, about if we could include a nature-based solution in our loans. I think, yes, we could. To approve a loan, we have to do a series of assessment of the technical studies, social and economic studies, do a cost-benefit analysis, financial feasibility, institutional feasibility, etc. And we have the performance indicators in the loan. So if the nature-based solution complies with all the assessments and the bank requires, and the impact on climate change required for that project, yes, we should potentially include nature-based solutions.
Great, thank you, and thanks for reminding me on that last question. Yeah, I think I want to go to you next, Christine, and then I'm going to come to Gareth, and I'll go to you last, Joachim. You know the best for last, always. But Christine, there may be more, but there were two questions that struck me that would be good to hear from you on. The one was around the site-specific nature-based solutions, the site-specific, which I think also ties into this discussion that Gareth opened up a can of worms on, around a good can of worms. But, around you can't always reach the kind of scale. The other one was the incentives for communities. And I was wondering if you had any experience of that in the SWSAs, for example.
Yeah. So I think on the incentives for communities, I mean, what we've been looking at there with a whole range of partners is essentially looking at how do you build sustainable enterprises around nature-based solutions. Many of those require an initial grant or some injection of philanthropic money where there's not an immediate financial return. But the idea is that eventually those enterprises will stand on their own 2 feet and will be still generating the financial and water and biodiversity benefits as well. So the example that I showed of the charcoal manufacture as a value-add industry linked to clearing alien invasives, and there were many others that we're experimenting with in that area, including beekeeping. There was the lady who'd graduated in her poultry keeping, etc. And of course, the livestock management was really important. For the majority of people in that area, sale of cattle is their key income. 65% of people in that area, that's their main form of income. So it's critical that that becomes self-sustaining and that the interventions are as light a touch as possible. But they were incredibly key in terms of connecting to market. There was also an issue on the chat raised about indigenous knowledge. And I think that was part of the development of those nature-based solutions, most certainly tapped back into indigenous knowledge. Because there's a temptation to say, the cows are trashing the place, get rid of the cows. And as Sisi Matelo, who I showed there, always says, it's not about the cow, it's about the how. So how many and how are the cows grazing and where are they trampling? And a lot of that was actually practiced, the previous generation, but economic pressures had driven a different behavior for more recently. So replacing those economic pressures with economic incentives through access to market were really key in turning around that system. And I think managed aquifer recharge is a nature-based solution, and it's one of the best.
You had to sneak that in, didn't you? I think this issue of community incentives, what communities used to do, economic pressures that are changing that behavior, and we can't restore it. This is a whole other conversation for a whole day around the social equity issues. Gareth, can you concentrate? Some of this was comment from Garth, but the bearer question is interesting. He wasn't sure if it was bearer or bearers, so you maybe want to qualify that. I think also the question of engineered, solutions for engineering. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I may be pronouncing it wrong, BEIRA, Northern Mozambique. It's not even a UNEP project. I think it's Hans Koenig, I think they're Dutch engineering company who are really leading this. And just if you Google this, you're going to learn all about that. I think they're making a big deal about this. But I really appreciate you raising this issue of green versus grey, because I don't think it's a bad thing, sorry, where's our colleague up there, to be a nature-based solutions fan. That's not a bad thing, but when working for UNEP and in this role, you have to realize that you need to be a nature-based solutions, not an NbS evangelist. You need to be an NbS pragmatist, and UNEP will. I think I can speak for UNEP. Joachim will have to slap me later if I'm speaking out of turn. Okay, I'll speak for myself. It's there are many cases where hard engineering solutions are much better. It's much better. It's much easier to do. The cost returns are clear. It happens straight away. There were even discussing earlier, there are even negative things about nature-based solutions. Someone came up with the example of wetlands for filtering. There's just basically collecting all that pollution, right? So I think trying not to turn this into an us versus them conversation, I find that very detrimental to the whole discussion, I would say.
I think that's a brilliant point. It's not an us versus them. It's also not one or the other, is it?
No,
yeah.
No.
exactly. Which brings me to you. So firstly, I'd love you to comment on Christine's great enthusiasm for artificial recharge. So there's already, because you and whoever said it online, the person that said it online are not in agreement, I don't think. Okay. And then I think this question of, and I'm adding this in, because it's been a bit of a theme, I think, right from the word cloud that we saw earlier. Right. This question of one or the other. Yep. And where do we land this? And your colleague, and you can speak for UNEP or for your fishery side of life, we don't mind. But how do we be pragmatic without sitting on the fence and greenwashing? Yeah.
All right. I'll try to address all these things. Okay, first about the artificial recharge. I mean, we can argue that, but what's happening is that we see a lot of more pressure and utilization of finite water resources. So what a lot of the ecosystem services that we have need to be augmented. They might be a little bit depleted, right? So I would say that we can, and this is where sort of gray and green kind of combine. We can use a little bit of gray to sort of boost and ecosystem services like groundwater can do, and also another example would be, for example, if we say treatment of stormwater, we can let artificial wetlands do an initial treatment of those that stormwater, so that when it goes to the sewage treatment plant, we reduce the cost, and so we find combinations like this, right? So I think this either or discussion is not so helpful, but let's just start saying this. I think it's extremely important that we understand what nature-based solutions can do and what they can't do, because there's a lot they can't do, and therefore, and it's also very important that we can monitor and evaluate and get data on what they can do, right? And understand what are sort of the drawbacks, not just the benefits. We know there's super many benefits, but there are certain things that make it difficult. We heard about politics and about bureaucracy. We know that very often implementing nature-based solutions take time. They take a lot of time. And when if we're sitting in a government, if we are developing an urban area or something, we might not have that time. The budgets are available for a certain time. The politicians have their mandate periods, so forth. They need to get things happening. And nature-based solutions, unfortunately, not maybe as nimble as sometimes as built infrastructure. So that's something we have to keep in mind. We also know that nature-based solutions require land, and therefore we need a joint land and water management and development here. Very important, and that's where IWM also comes in. We talk about aligning the policies, institutions, strategies for land management, water management, but we also need access to that land, and land tenure is very important here, and that also brings us into the aspect of financing, and if we can get return on the investment. I alluded to that in my opening statement. Sometimes it's very easy to see the beneficiaries right there, but other times with our nature-based solutions, it's more intangible. It's more like a global benefit, and who can provide that return on the investment? Who can even make that investment? So that's very important to keep in mind too. So I think that I'm also in favor of seeing this a little bit as a complementary thing. It can be fantastic for certain aspects, but it's sometimes we need maybe a gray solution or a combination. On engineering codes, there was a question on that. I have to say, I'm not so sure, but my impression is that the engineers know very well what to do with nature-based solutions. It's not the engineers that don't know how to apply it. I think it's more the politicians and decision makers and the planners that don't know how to factor this in, to be perfectly honest. We often call on the engineers, and they're doing it a lot with green spaces, green roofs, constructed wetlands, all sorts of things. So the engineers know, basically understand and can design the nature-based solutions, but we need to enable them to advance them. Thank you.
I like that you used the word enable. Thank you. All right, so we're at 6 minutes to go. I'm going to ask the panelists each one question. They've got a tweet. Do you know what a tweet is? I think it's 130 characters. It's a very short statement. Got that? Okay. So the tweet is on the question of if you had only X amount of money and there was only one thing to do, what would it be? To make nature-based solutions land. One thing. What is the one thing you would choose? As the last speaker, which will be you, Joachim, so Hilary Price, juries, as Joachim makes his point, will you please flash up the last Mentimeter so that we can give the audience the last word on the topic? So Christine, what is your one thing? Tweet.
Hashtag.
Are you finished?
Hashtag NbS. Forever. Blue heart, green heart. Picture of Matatiele. If we don't have the regulations, we can't take it out there. We have to have those in place.
Regulations. That was one of the things on my shortlist. Gareth.
Mine is nothing to do with money or perhaps linked, I would say political will. Because it's a bit of a cheap one, because in order to achieve political will, there are so many other prerequisites that need to be met. So I think that's key.
Okay, thank you, Maria.
Fortunately, I had thought of institutional framework, which is the same, so I can't. I would say that advocacy for engagement and financial sustainability.
Financial sustainability, a key one, and I think it was also echoes some of the questions that came up in the room. And then, just before I go to Joachim, I think the things that were so far not said, so you have to say something new now, okay. That, that sort of have come through this session, have included being able to look at return on investment. I think it was what you were saying about being able to quantify the different benefits. And I suppose in a way, I know I got the wrong end of the stick a bit there, but in a way it was also where I was coming from, that point around the performance-based financial mechanisms, which I think do have to be there. Yes. Humble personal view. And then, Joachim, you have nearly the last word.
Oh, okay.
Then ultimate, the rest goes to the audience.
I was thinking about certain catchphrases and stuff. Okay, for one thing first, I think we have to avoid become like zealots on this topic, just saying. You remember the discussion we had a couple of years back on eco-sanitation versus, normal sanitation, and it became a little bit of a dichotomy there, which was not helpful. Let's avoid that. Let's avoid to overpromise, but let's frame this in the positive. So I was thinking it's very important that we work with nature, not against nature. And if we don't, nature is going to take, have the final say.
Its course.
It will have its final say, and we will be doomed.
All right. Let's see how our audience is feeling. Hilary, I don't see Mentimeter. Is it on its way? It's there. All right. Colleagues, we've got 3 questions. We're just wanting to see where you're standing after this session. And while you're doing that, I think the 2 things that our panel, I only gave them, and you took advantage, I only gave them a tweet, but I think 2 other things that have come up today have been intersectoral governance. Yeah. And I'm wondering, we can have a chat about this afterwards, but from a UNEP perspective, policy, from a development finance perspective, how do we deal with this? And then I think the other for me, a closing tweet, I'm just summarizing what's come here, is time and agility.
Yes.
So you're saying nature-based solutions are not always so agile. I'm wondering, how do we change that? And not just accept, you don't want to do the wrong thing, but not just accept the status quo. And the time factor is one of the reasons I'm thinking that. We don't have time. Yeah. All right. Colleagues, thanks so much. I'm watching the screen here. So to what extent to which you think nature-based solutions should be mainstreamed to become the new normal, you can see where the tipping point's gone. And I think that's probably not zealism so much as
working with nature.
working with nature, so that's great. Hilary, let's go to the last question, please. So this is the extent to which you think nature-based solutions can be mainstreamed. This is a feasibility question. It's a little bit further this way.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's a little bit further this way. So we've still got, your 7 challenges became, I think, like 9 or 10. Did you notice
I had
that?
8. I had 8.
No,
You had 8,
but
sorry.
Belinda, on this particular question, you know, to me, it kind of resonates in either/or thinking somehow. I would rather see it, or it depends how you read the question, but if we're saying we want to mainstream nature-based solutions so that they are utilized as much as possible and used in complementarity and sometimes only, but they become, you know, an integral part of how we plan, then I get it. But if we think...
That is what we mean.
That's what you mean, thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks for clarifying. All right, Hills, so we've got, I think slightly different needles here. So what we want versus what we can achieve. I think there's still question marks, and that's clear. So Hills, I think we can go to the last one, please. One tweet, one word. Gareth, your political will point is I think.
Where there's a will, there's money.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think data maybe means data participation, capacity building, determination. I like the determination.
Yeah, that's a very important.
Yeah, it's a very nice one.
Partnership.
Yeah.
Public-private.
Yeah, partnership and integration.
Public-private partnership.
Our finance expert has spoken. It's all about public-private partnerships. Christine spoke about community public partnerships. So, yeah, partnerships are key. I hope you all have a wonderful week building partnerships. I hope this session has been helpful. It certainly has been for us in our work. I want to thank our wonderful panelists, Christine, Gareth, Maria, Joachim. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Belinda.
Nice to meet you too.
Well done.
Nice session.
I hope.